coming today and supporting, or hopefully supporting and reporting on what we're about to advance. My name is John Flanagan. I'm a New York State Senator from the 2nd District, and I am Chair of the Senate Education Committee. I want to go through a couple different things and talk about a report that we have, some legislation, but I want to start by thanking Suffolk Community College for their hospitality. They are always great to work with, and I think it's particularly fitting that we're talking about education on an educational campus. And a lot of the things that are being discussed in terms of education now revolve around college and career readiness, and there's a strong focus on community college, the involvement that they have. So again, Suffolk Community College is a fabulous institution here on Long Island and in New York State. I also stand before you as a parent, as much as anything else. I am an elected official, of course, but I'm a parent. 3 children, Ashley, Sean, and Jake, all of whom are graduates of the public school system in the state of New York. They got a great education at the Northport School District, and I want to use that as a segue to speak about education generally, and then get into a lot more specifics. You know, I think for far too long, frankly, there's been a lot of negativity, a lot of bad stuff being said about education across the state of New York, and I think we need to focus on those things and try and correct them, but equally, if not more important, we need to start the dialogue and discussion about things that are going well. We have thousands of talented students in every community across the state of New York. We have thousands of talented teachers and administrators, and I think it's extraordinarily important to recognize some of those accomplishments individually, collectively, right here on Long Island. Graduation rates on the whole are very high. College and career readiness is a lot higher than many other places, and we have a lot to be proud of. I'm not suggesting that we don't have issues to address, but frankly, we have a lot to be proud of, and you can start right here on Long Island and go to any part of the state of New York. So many of you have heard me say this, I'll repeat it. There is nothing more important and nothing more effective than having a good quality teacher in front of the classroom. Every parent wants that, every parent hopes for that, and frankly, even young students are smart enough to know the value of having somebody like that in front of their classroom. So what I want to talk about today is the status of a number of things in education, but I would like to be clear about several different things. First of all, I'm standing here as the chair of the Senate Education Committee. I'm reporting on hearings that we had that took place all across the state over the last several months. These issues are being discussed, they were discussed, they will be discussed prospectively, and it's important to recognize that I'm offering this report as the chair of the committee. There are a multitude of issues that need to be vetted and discussed not only with members of our conference, but with the New York State Assembly as well, the governor's office, SED, the regents, and I'll come back to this later, but we also have to have a much more robust dialogue with our federal representatives. I have spoken at great length with many people who are involved in education, continue to do so. Phone calls this morning, many phone calls yesterday. I'm sure many that will come today as well. And I look forward to working closely with all the people that I just mentioned. Fortunately for me, I have an excellent working relationship with Assemblywoman Kathy Nolan, who happens to chair the Education Committee in the Assembly. And I look forward to working with her on some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. And obviously, there is an acute concern about what's going on out in the field, what's going on in education. And we started, if you go back a little while ago, the Senate is really the only organized entity that has had formal public hearings. Several months ago, we had announced in July, over the summer, that we would have statewide hearings. We started out with a plan for Long Island, Syracuse, Buffalo, and New York City. There was keen interest, and we ended up adding a 5th hearing to take place in Albany. So we did that for several different reasons. We wanted to make sure we got a good cross-section of opinions in every community across the state. We also spaced it out, and we decided to do these hearings after the beginning of the school year so that there could be much more involvement. And I think to some extent that was fortuitous because there was great information that was offered as these plans continued to be rolled out, as pre- and post-testing came more into being, and it gave people a chance not only to hear what others had to say, but to build on that and enhance some of the dialogue that has taken place. I also think it's fitting that we're here at Suffolk Community College because this is where we had the first hearing. It was the first one, and it was well attended, and I think people were surprised at the depth of material that was advanced and the passion that was associated with what people had to say. So if you look, we had over 100 witnesses. We had hundreds of pages of testimony submitted separately from the hearings. We had hundreds of pages of testimony submitted in conjunction with the hearings. And we also had over close to 30 hours of verbal testimony at the different hearings. So As a backdrop and as a formation of a public record, I think we have extremely valuable information for people to review. There was no preordained setup, there was no goal other than to see what people were thinking, what was going on out in the field, and how could we possibly address some of the concerns that were out there. So if I look, I think it's fair to say that the Senate has acted very consistently, and what you're seeing today is an outgrowth of that. I look forward to more conversations with my colleagues here on Long Island, as well as other parts of the state. So if I can, I just want to talk about some general things at the hearings. Some of you had attended them. There was no shortage of opinion, no lack of passion whatsoever. There were very strongly held views, and frankly, that's helpful. It's good to hear people with passion and to see that they have a keen interest in their children's well-being and in their community's well-being. And one of the interesting sidelights of this is that many of the people that came and spoke are steeped in experience in education, but they're also parents. Many of the superintendents, the school board members, all those types of folks, they're parents as well, and many of them are grandparents. So we had a unique perspective from a personal level, combined with the professional experience that is very helpful to the committee. So, one of the questions that comes up all the time is who is responsible and who is in charge? And who can we go to? Who are the proverbial they? How do we speak to people who actually are responsible for policy or for budgetary matters or for legislative action? So there has been an education process for a lot of different people about who plays what role. In my humble opinion, in my estimation, there is a delicate balance about who plays what role here in the state of New York. The legislature clearly plays a very important role, not only in terms of oversight, but in terms of budgetary issues. We do that on an annual basis, and the single most important component of our state budget is educational funding, and that, of course, occupies a great deal of our time. Having said that, it's also very important to understand what role we play in educational policy. I think we have to be very careful not to go over that line. SED sets educational policy. The New York State Regents set educational policy, and in large part they are responsible for the administration of that policy throughout the state of New York. And I also feel strongly that people learn or are learning a lot about things like curriculum. I think the state legislature and the governor should be somewhat loath to be going in and saying, this is exactly what should be taught in a classroom. We have to be careful because we don't have the expertise, and I think that is better left and more suited to people who are steeped in educational experience, whether they're administrators, teachers, people who are out in the field. There are a lot of competent, talented people who can do that, do it on a regular basis, and should continue to do it. So when we as a legislative entity, Senate or Assembly, get involved, we have to be judicious in that involvement, recognize what our role is, and respect, equally as important, the role that other people play. So, the federal government. I think it's important to speak about the role that they play. We have, here on Long Island, it's probably a great example. We jealously guard local control. We love our communities, we love our school districts, and frankly, we want it to stay there. A lot of people don't really want the state coming in an overbearing capacity. And frankly, a lot of people don't want to see the federal government doing the same thing. There's been a wealth of discussion and extensive debate on the role of the federal government. Where does it start? Where does it end? And I think for far too long, frankly, we have not partnered as well enough with our federal colleagues, and I think they have a corresponding obligation to do the same with us. Their role has increased, and they can be helpful and be of assistance on budgetary matters like funding of No Child Left Behind, which frankly has not been funded properly for a number of years, and in seeking waivers for specific issues that would be helpful to students in particular and parents by extension. So the federal government, we prospectively, Regents, SED, the governor's office, we need to be going to them, and all of you know we don't exactly have a shy delegation here in the state of New York. So their input and their imprimatur on some of these things can and should be helpful. If you look at our form here, the Regents Reform Agenda, assessing our progress, we focused on three primary things: Common Core, testing, and privacy. And it would probably, you could say you have different hearings on each of those, but there's an inevitable overlap, and I think it underscores part of what's happening in education. One of the feelings that's out there is that people are frustrated because so many things are happening at once. even though Common Core was essentially adopted in 2010 and has slowly been rolled out much more quickly in the 12-13 school year, there's a lot of factors that are affecting education generally. So there's sort of an onslaught of events that have exacerbated some of the issues that people are concerned about. We had funding issues. We had a downturn in our economy. We had tough years for a couple of years in terms of budgetary advances in education. Last year was better, $750 million of new money, almost $1 billion this year, but we're still trying to forge ahead. You have things like APPR, which plays a critical role in a lot of these discussions. And let's be clear about APPR, that is still generally a new law. It is being implemented, but the people who negotiated that were the governor and the New York State United Teachers and the State Education Department. So the content of that law is largely based on negotiation that took place between the governor and NYSE. A lot of discussion about what should happen now and what should happen prospectively, but it's important to keep that in mind as a backdrop. Then, of course, you have the rollout and the implementation of Common Core and the vexing issues associated with that. Even where things are going well, and there's not a lot of places where they are going well, it's still a challenge because there's so much coming at once. And then throw in issues that are important, that play a critical role in people's lives and their well-being and their persona. And that is an issue like privacy. People are deeply concerned about what the status of their privacy is, and more importantly, what's the status of the privacy of their children. So Common Core, testing, and privacy. And I think it's fair to say that there was a general consensus. I can't say unanimity, and I don't think anyone can say, but a general consensus that Common Core is a good thing. 45 states have adopted Common Core, and New York State has adopted Common Core, and virtually every major educational organization in the state of New York has stood strongly in favor of Common Core standards, and they continue to do so. Perfect example, Michael Mulgrew, head of the UFT, spoke very passionately at our New York City hearing about the continued value of Common Core standards, full well knowing that he got some brushback from his members and will continue to do so. But I think it's important to recognize that those who are our educational leaders still stand in support of Common Core standards. However, and at the same time, there is a huge frustration and aggravation with the rollout and the implementation of Common Core. At the hearing that we had here and in other places, there were consistent themes. There was passion, there was frustration, there was angst, there was consternation. There were people who were upset because the rules of the game seems to be changing, or were changing and are changing at breakneck speed, and a lot of people are not properly prepared. Perfect example. Parents came and testified. They testified about privacy, about children with special needs, and about what they want for their kids. They're also concerned because this is all new stuff, and it's challenging. Even if you are dedicated and you're the type of family that's involved in your children's lives in an appropriate and deep fashion, you still are concerned because many of our parents learned a different way. I learned a different way. When my kids were in school, Common Core was not around, so when you're at home, you're trying to help your child do their homework, and it's a case of first impression for you, that makes it that much more challenging. The frustration came from parents, especially, from educators, and from a wide variety of groups and people who felt and feel still that the State Education Department and the Regents are not listening. And there have been forums all over the state. Certainly the Senate started before anyone else. There's been a lot of other forums. But I do think that there has been a consistent frustration about the lack of accountability by SED. They purport and they will claim that they're out there, they're listening, and they're making changes. The public does not agree. And the people in the educational community do not agree as well. I think they believe the rollout has been flawed, that the implementation has been spotty, sporadic, less than professional, and they, meaning the State Education Department, they're holding districts to standards that they don't abide by themselves. When you make a representation to school districts that you're going to have modules and you're going to have curriculum available, all of that by June 30th, 2013, and that doesn't happen, then you're putting districts in a very difficult spot. And that's a critical part of what is being discussed. So Common Core standards, valuable, yes. Long-term value, considered to be that way. The implementation has not been good. We have correspondence to the department. There's a lengthy letter in your packet about things that we believe they need to be addressing, that they need to be listening to, and we give them, I think, an excellent summary of what people have been saying. Then you go to testing. part of the frustration here is that people are now saying there are more tests than ever before. There's too many, there's too great a frequency. Now people are talking about pre-testing, post-testing, and they are concerned, they're frustrated, and they're angry. They don't see the value in this, and there seems to be an attitude that we're going to teach to the test, that's all it's going to be. It's going to be rote testing. It's not going to be the real inherent value of learning that we all would like to think can happen in our schools. And that is a result of a number of different things. You had a situation where the state education department comes to the public and says, we realize this is going to be challenging, so we're going to help. We're going to set up a paradigm where we'll put ourselves in an area where, frankly, we really haven't been in great depth before. We'll help you with curriculum. We'll offer you guidance. We'll offer you assistance, and in some cases, we'll even offer you funding. So school districts, I think fairly so, took a step back and said, okay, this is all new, they're going to help us, we'll wait. Then the rush came, and then ATPR plans came, and then deadlines came. And a lot of school districts were like, we got to get this done, we have to negotiate, we have to get it out there, so you know what, we're going to take what's offered and we're going to run with it. It may not be exactly what we want, it may not be the best, and it may not be timely, but we feel like we have a gun to our head and we have to take these types of steps. That's where a lot of this friction lies in terms of what's happening in the field, what's being said, and a strong sentiment that the state education department is not positively acting on recommendations from people who have to actually implement educational policy in the state of New York. So that's a clear frustration, and it ties into testing. There's also a whole subset of testing regarding, it started off in the summer, kindergarten through second grade. Kindergarten through second grade. And now, because the city of New York decided to do pre-K testing, the whole dialogue has changed in that area, and now there's talk about pre-K through 2. Standardized tests, bubble tests. Again, Michael Mulgrew in the city of New York at the hearing said, there are many children who are 4 or 5 years old who still have difficulty properly holding a pencil. How are we holding them to a standard where we expect them to be able to do these tests when their dexterity is not even at a point that they can do it as well as they need to? That is P through 2. Then the whole issue of privacy. Privacy is a huge challenge, I think, on so many different levels. And I believe we all look at this as adults, you know, identity theft and things like that. We worry about that, and legitimately so. We worry about hackers, we worry about the cloud, we worry about things like an educational data portal, companies like InBloom. All this stuff is being bandied about, and yet right now, it's difficult to point to where there have been egregious problems or really significant crimes or acts that take place like that. Not to say that they aren't there, but there seems to be a prospective worry about providing data. And I think it's legitimate to say, okay, we need to have certain things. Yeah, you need to have what they call personally identifiable information versus directory information. There's a legitimacy to doing it for school lunches, for busing, for things like financing of special education. So that some of the data that's being asked for is legitimate, has been so for many years. Where people are concerned is that there seems to be this potential amassing of data, and then they are more concerned that somehow that's going to get out. It is fair to say, why do you need 400 data points? Now the department says, well, it's not 400. We checked, and I think the number is 372. So it may not be 400, but 372 is a lot of information. And as a parent, as an elected official, I want to ask those questions. What's it for? Why do you need all that stuff? So before you're going to take it and potentially go someplace else, whether it's in the data portal that's being talked about, I think we need to take a step back. And that was very clear from a lot of the things that we heard from people. On top of that, there is a feeling that we need to be taking a look, I said, assessing our progress. Part of the correspondence to the department and part of what we put in our release is that there should be an independent study. Yes, state ed should come out with a report on what they believe is happening in relation to Common Core, but we also believe there should be an independent and audit study to, quote-unquote, assess the assessment. So there's a lot of information that came from our hearings, and there is a lot of information that continues to come in. I think it's critically important to recognize we have ongoing discussions with people every single day who are working in the field of education. So let me get to specifics in terms of recommendations. The department has an opportunity, and I think they have an obligation. And part of that opportunity and obligation is to act expeditiously. Some of the things that they've talked about are frustrating. They have said that they are going to seek a waiver from the federal government on students with disabilities. so that a child who is chronologically in 5th grade, but who is instructionally in 1st grade, is not mandated to take a 5th grade test. Common sense would dictate that. Anybody, and particularly as a parent, you hear that, yeah, they test them on an appropriate level. We heard testimony in November, but the application's not going until the end of January. That's too long, just frankly too long, and there's no reason for that kind of delay. So students with disabilities, English language learners, things like the algebra exam, get it done now. Get it done because it should be done. Get it done because it helps send a message to people who are out in our communities. My God, somebody's actually listening, somebody's doing something. So that's immediate action that they can take. We also believe that the state ed department should delay the implementation of the education data portal for a year. Some of the things I alluded to before and spoke to directly are unanswered. There's a lot of concerns. The Assembly has acted on some legislation in the area of privacy. We look forward to working with them on that. But it is probably a prudent course to say, let's take that proverbial step back for right now. So a 1-year delay on that continued implementation. Let us figure some things out. Let us come up with legislation. And we did hear from experts in the field who feel that FERPA, the Federal Privacy Act, can be enhanced by protections in the state of New York. So there is obviously other things that the department can do. We also believe very strongly, and the department deserves a modicum of credit for this because they have earmarked funding for professional development. We believe there's an acute timing and need for new funding for professional development. We are going to advocate that in our budgetary goals for the coming year. And with all the things that are out there, I haven't heard anyone say that professional development is a bad idea. If this is new, if it's challenging, get it out there, allow people an opportunity to be properly taught how to do their teaching. And I also have to say, I think if we can find new and additional funding, that school districts should be helping parents. I think it's important that we have some type of parent involvement and some type of parent workshops, because as I said before, parents want to help their kids, and if they get the right kind of guidance in doing so, that makes things better for everybody. That's professional development, cloaked in a different way, but it's got some real inherent value. Then we have legislative items. There are 4 bills for your consideration. Let me speak to each of them directly. We have the privacy bill. It is different from the bills that are out there in the Assembly, but I think we have a great opportunity to partner and get something done. There seems to be a fairly good consensus on what should be involved. We advocate for a chief privacy officer. We advocate for a parent bill of rights. We advocate for greater accountability. We provide for civil and criminal penalties so that if there are people who are out there acting as bad actors, that they be caught and punished appropriately in a timely and swift fashion. And that is something that we strongly believe in. But I do think the Parent Bill of Rights is extraordinarily important, and their input and involvement has to be consistent all along the way. Testing. I mentioned testing before. P through 2. And what we're doing is we're giving teachers and school districts an opportunity we're giving them the tools on how to fix it. They have come to us and they have said, these are problems. The solution we're giving them essentially says, if you have an APPR plan and it gets submitted to the state of New York, and you have any testing other than diagnostic testing for pre-K through 2, that your APPR plan will not be approved. It's very straightforward. We're not trying to mess around with anything that requires testing from the federal level. Those are obligations that we have to meet, even if we may not like them. But it's very clear. You put out a plan, and it's got P through 2, and it's standardized testing, and not diagnostic, the plan will be rejected by the state. And it should be. Pre- and post-testing, or as probably more appropriately should be described, unnecessary testing. With the APPR plans that came about last year, this year is really the first time that we're seeing a lot of the quote-unquote pre-testing. What we're doing is putting in legislation that says a district, if they come to the state to modify their APPR plan, there will be an expedited review. I don't want to say guaranteed approval, but an expedited review. If you certify that this is the sole thing that you're looking for at this time, you get an expedited review, and I think there's a pretty good chance that there will be approval. The department has spoken out about this, about their concerns about testing as well. This gives, again, it's a vehicle, it's a tool, an opportunity for districts to work with their bargaining units, come back to the state in an expedited fashion, and get it done. It doesn't ban any of this stuff outright or per se. It just gives them the right way to do it, and we do it through legislation. So privacy, P2, unnecessary testing, and I mentioned before about a study. We are putting in legislation calling for action by the department as well as an independent review of that activity. And the last thing that I want to speak to is a lot of people are talking about how do you properly implement and how do you do so in a capacity that does not adversely affect students, teachers, schools, and local communities. The department has come out and said, even with the reduction in test scores, that no one should really worry about that. But that's exactly what people worry about. Even if you're a good teacher, we had the Teacher of the Year appear at the Albany hearing. She was not rated highly effective. She was the 2012 Teacher of the Year, but she was not rated highly effective. So there are concerns, legitimately so, about what is being done. The challenging part is how do you figure out where do you do something that might be considered a pause or a delay or a moratorium. In my opinion, I'm trying to use common sense. I believe, and I think most parents would agree with this, if you're going to assess children, do so, and if you're going to assess teachers, do so in relation to what they have learned. If you've gotten 20% of the material, why are you being tested on 100%? If you haven't been exposed to the other 80%, why are you being told that you have to do that? I don't think that's appropriate. I think it's unfair. And what it does two things. If you do it in accordance with what's out there, that doesn't delay things. It continues the implementation, but it gives it an opportunity to be done in an appropriate capacity. And I guarantee you, there will be people who will be challenged by this, and they'll say they want a lot more, but this is something that we are discussing every single day. I've gone to every major educational organization and asked them for their input. They all come and they say, we want this, we want that, we want this. But when you go to them and say, give us language, show us exactly how you want it done, we haven't exactly gotten an overwhelming amount of information. So part of our challenge is, how do you do it the right way? Should it be done at all? I think we can have appropriate, timely implementation, and that children should be assessed according to what they have learned. Last thing in relation to curriculum in that type of area. I think it's unfair to expect teachers to get information midstream, mid-year, not having had the tools to look at through the summer or even earlier, and then expect them to be all set and ready to go and be prepared for April assessments or Regents in certain other cases. So there are opportunities there. It is an ongoing discussion. I believe that we will have a lot more activity in this area, but I also have to say very clearly, we have expectations that the State Education Department has to listen. We're trying to give them guidance, we're trying to give them directives, we're trying to do it diplomatically, but if we feel that what we're advocating is falling on deaf ears, then the legislature should intervene. There are things that can be done, but we hope that the department will take positive steps right now. I apologize for the length of my comments, but there's a lot of material that needs to be discussed. I'm just going to stress again, this is not, what we're offering today is good quality stuff. It's important legislation, it gives opportunities, but I'm also very cognizant of the fact that we're going to have these discussions ongoing. There will be a lot more talk about proper implementation. And I think that dialogue is valuable, but the difficulty in that area, it's like threading a needle. It's hard to do, and it's got to be done properly. So I appreciate the attention, and more than happy to take any questions.
Senator, so is it accurate to say that you think there should be, the unnecessary testing bill, is that giving individual school districts an opportunity to seek to get out from underneath the onus of all the tests?
Yes, it absolutely is. And Greg, I think it's important for us to recognize, we're not going in and saying you can't do any pre-testing, you can't do any post-testing. In large respect, that should be a decision best left at the local level. We also need to remember that almost all of it, if not all of it, was collectively bargained. Now everybody's mindset has changed. So what we're saying, we're not going and saying, you're forbidden from doing this. We're saying, you've talked about it, you've said there's too much, you've advocated for change, we're giving you the tools on how to do it. Go back to the bargaining table, work out a plan, send it up to state ed, it'll get an expedited review, and it's really important because it's focused on that and that alone. So the timing of it is, I think it's excellent. So we're giving them a very strong vehicle to accomplish what they have been advocating.
So is it accurate then to say that you believe there has been too much testing?
Well, let me put it this way. I pride myself on being a good listener, and there has been consistent testimony everywhere, even independent of our own hearings, that there is too much testing. I'm not in the classroom, but I listen to the people who are. I listen to parents in particular, and I have to say that I find when I'm out, either in a business or a personal capacity, there's a lot more people talking about Common Core and what's going on in education than there was 6 months ago, and certainly more than there was 18 months ago. So I think there is a legitimate argument that there is too much testing.
Do you feel that Mr. King, during some of these gatherings with the parents and the professionals, that he said Common Core is here to stay, this is the way it's going to be, I'm listening to everybody, but do you feel that there is room for movement on some of the standards that they're laying out for the education of the kids?
If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be standing in front of you. I can tell you very clearly that one of the greatest challenges of being in public office and serving in an administrative capacity is there will be times where you have to stand up and say, things are not going as well as we thought, and we need to make adjustments. I believe the commissioner is very dedicated, as are many other people, to Common Core standards and the valuable learning associated with it. Where I think they've dropped the ball is not recognizing things that have not gone well. Like I said before, you go to school districts and you say, we're going to have all this material for you, June 30th, 2013. Okay, good. We're going to wait. We're going to get there. We're going to partner. We're going to do this together. It doesn't happen. They need to stand up. They need to go before the public. And in essence, it's kind of like an act of contrition. Go out there and say, we still have real, legitimate, laudable goals, but we have to acknowledge that we're not exactly on the track that we want to be. And nobody likes to have to do that, but frankly, they need to do it, and if they don't, we'll probably do it for them.
John, but two questions. Following up on that, that hasn't happened yet,
Right.
and I think people were surprised after the amount of testimony that the commissioner didn't say, I hear you, yes, we have some problems. In fact, it was the opposite. People found him to be very smug, sort of staring into space, not really listening to what they were saying, or quite frankly, not caring. So what makes you think this will force them to stand up and say, yes, there are some things that we need to do better? Why now? Why not in this past year?
Well, why now is there's no reason to wait, and I don't want to wait, and nobody wants to delay. And if we talk about goal-oriented approaches, and we're talking about students, and by extension their parents, there is no reason to wait. I concur with you that people have made those types of statements. I have been in a number of forums where I've watched the commissioner, where I've been with the commissioner, and people absolutely feel what you are saying. I think what we are doing are several different things. We're giving them a chance. You heard me speak to timing. You heard me use terms like expeditiously, things that need swift action now. If they came out and said, you know what, in November we talked about students with disabilities, it was going to take till the end of January. We took our staff, moved them around, now it's going to be in by December 15th. It's not going to change the world, but it sends a message that, okay, we're listening. There are many of my colleagues who feel very passionately about these issues. They want input, they want to do a lot of different things, and the people are chomping at the bit. If state ed and the regions don't react, then, as I said before, we will take steps that we believe are necessary to effectuate some of those changes.
So what kind of a time frame are you talking about? Because, you know, we're going to go out on the street and ask people, and they're going to say, well, quick to regular folk is not quick to lawmakers. So what's your time frame for if they don't do something?
Well, I'm regular folks, so I think quick is now.
You know what I mean? People
I do,
say nothing
I do.
goes fast in a state.
But
What
you
are talking
know,
about?
if state ed can react administratively on things that they have control over, they have the authority and discretion, because a lot of the things they put out, they have the inherent power to do, which means they also have the inherent power to modify them or pull them back. Delay the educational data portal. That's just one it's not a simple thing, but it's a straightforward thing. Do that, and people's idea of now, January is the beginning of our legislative session. So from that standpoint, nothing's going to happen legislatively in December. I can tell you quite clearly that as the chair of the committee, I intend to aggressively advance these pieces of legislation immediately. And you know, January tends to be a more methodical month. To me, there's no reason in the world why we can't hit the ground running, get these things out there. And if there's good debate and dialogue, and we work closely with the Assembly, if that takes a little bit more time to get to the right product, I'm willing to do that. But I think the public is expecting that action will be taken now. Not in the sense that how they view government. I think that people look at this and say, okay, when I say now to my kids, and I expect things to be done, I expect them now, not 6 months from now.
John, as you know, I'm sorry, go ahead. Finish up.
Just a follow-up. I think when people hear changes to Common Core, their mind sort of leaps to fewer tests. But in interviews with Roger Tillis, our Long Island Regent, I think we need to be clear there are some tests, though, that the state ed department doesn't have control over, right? Like we're talking about ELA, we're talking about math, we're talking about the science test for fourth graders, we're talking about DBQs. What tests are we talking about unnecessary? Because people sort of lump them all together. They're not all the same test, though.
That is an excellent question, and I'm really glad you asked it because I'll go back to something I said before. All those tests that you just mentioned, we have to administer. Those are federally mandated tests. That is why I think we have to have that dialogue with our federal representatives. They have been conspicuously quiet on all these issues, and I think that you want to talk about timing? Now is the time for them to get a lot more aggressive. I don't think it's unfair to go back and say, why even if it's a federal mandate, why do we have all these tests through from 3rd to 8th grade? I remember listening to the interim superintendent in Mount Vernon. 40 years of experience. This lady was awesome. She's been around the block. She's a complete pro. She was advocating, do it every other year. And I don't remember exactly which year she was talking about, but that should be part of the discussion. So we are hamstrung to a degree by actions imposed on us by the federal government. If you look at what the requirements are to get a diploma in the state of New York, there are regions, but virtually all of those other requirements, probably 90% of them, we have to do because of the federal government. So I think this is a robust discussion that could lead to other changes. And I recognize if people think things move slowly here in the state of New York, at the federal level, they make us look like the roadrunner compared to what some of the things they take the time to do.
John, as you know, a lot of parents have asked for an opt-out provision. The Assembly has supported one. Does your student privacy bill address that issue of the opt-out?
John, you know what? I'm grateful that you asked that question as well, because I forgot to mention this before. Our legislation provides basically for a school district opt-out. And, you know, this is listening carefully to what is going on out there. I think one of the things that people need to recognize is that for years, schools have been contracting with third-party vendors, and it's been a patchwork, it's been a hodgepodge, there's no particular rhyme or reason to it, and I'm not saying it's bad. It helps for the efficient, smooth operation of school districts. I do think that a school district opt-out, so that you fulfill your requirements of what you're supposed to provide to the state and federal government, but you're not throwing everything else up there in the portal or the cloud, however you may call it. That's going to be part of the debate. I think we strike a middle ground by choosing the school district opt-out. The parental opt-out, I deeply respect the concerns that people have, but I also recognize that there's some type of balance in allowing schools to properly administer what they're doing. I don't believe that there should be, you know, really personal information ever shared with anybody, but I also recognize schools come to us all the time and say, every time you do something, you're sometimes the law of unintended consequences. You're going to add to our costs exponentially. It's a legitimate discussion, but our legislation contains a school district opt-out.
Could you address the question of could you go a little further in explaining why you think that an opt-out by parents themselves is wrong, would be the wrong approach.
No, I don't want it to be construed that, I don't feel like I or many of my colleagues are suggesting or want to advance the notion that parents should not be able to protect their privacy and, more importantly, the privacy of their children. I think what we're trying to do is, again, strike that balance. John, I am acutely aware we will have, I'm sure, a lot of discussion in this area, and that's one of the values of putting legislation out there. It gives people a chance to review it and offer their own comments, and I expect that we will get a significant input on that issue.
To be clear, though, you're talking about opting out of the EDP, not opting out of taking the exams, which was a whole separate thing. You're talking about opting out of putting privacy information, right?
Correct.
Okay. Can you add, what about, is there anything in any of these recommendations about the opting out of taking the exams? Because there's the concern for districts about falling below the 95% and risking funding.
Well, that is a legitimate issue. It's a federal issue primarily with funding like Title I, and I think that is I want to take a different tack. I think to advance that notion ignores some of the real issues that should be discussed. We spoke just a couple of minutes ago about the federal exams that are mandated, that we're required to administer. We should be having a legitimate discussion about the quantity and the quality of the exams. I believe not only in education, but in life, people are tested all the time, and people are assessed all the time. We, as elected officials, we get assessed every 2 years. And you know, in all of your own professional lives, you are reviewed by the people that you work with and the people that you work for. So it is not unreasonable to assume that assessments have no value. And in fact, in speaking with educators in particular, they believe in the value of assessments. I think where the debate really has to come from, or where it should be focused on, is not throwing it all out, but recognizing what's the appropriate way to do it. And I will add, I think in large part, we have to rely on the expertise of people who are actually teaching and those who are administering in schools. I'll give you an example. Had a whole discussion with a teacher from Middle Country about standardized tests. So I asked her, well, how do you define a standardized test? Well, that's a test that every kid takes. Okay, well, if you're the teacher in the classroom, you have 25 children in the classroom, and you give a test to the kids, your test, not anybody else's, is that a standardized test? Well, no. To me, it's a standardized test because you just said the benchmark is if everyone takes it. So I think we have to rely on the talent and the expertise of teachers to properly assess. So I think opting out sort of begs the question. We need to be focusing again on what type of exams are being given and the qualitative value of them or not.
Senator, why is New York?
John, rumor has it that there's going to be that election next November, and that everybody in the state is up for election. Have you had any discussions with the governor about his State of the State address? Because in the last few years, he's had lengthy educational agendas, and obviously it would be very helpful if his and yours were congruent.
The governor put together an Education Reform Commission. I happen to be one of the 25 members on the commission. I'm the Senate representative. Kathy Nolan is the Senate representative. So I think there's been a lot of work done in the area of education through that commission. And in fact, we are obligated to come up with a final report by the end of the year for the governor's review. And if you look at what happened last year, he took portions of our report, which was an interim report, not a final report, and advanced that in the budget. And that was complicated because there were 5 different areas of competitive grant money that was allocated, and those proposals are going forward. I believe that we need to recognize that all of us as elected officials are involved in education. As I said before, we need to also be cognizant of what our role is. The governor, by example, there is no question that the governor negotiated APPR. He was the architect of that legislation, along with NYSET and the State Education Department. There's no question that the governor plays an absolutely critical role in education in the state of New York. Granted, he does not choose the commissioner, but neither do I. So we need to recognize that this is a shared responsibility. And I take what I do very seriously. I expect and believe that the governor takes what he does very seriously. He has to look at a broader view in his capacity as the chief executive of the entire state, but I think we have a commensurate obligation. And frankly, I've traveled all around the state. People are not going to expect that the governor is going to be watching. People are going to expect that the governor is going to be active. And I am hopeful that he has good positive things in his State of the State message and his budget. I can tell you very clearly, perfect example, we're going to push for professional development. And I'll tell you exactly what we're going to say. And what I'm going to say personally, I believe that we have appropriated money for competitive grants. We could probably have a whole separate discussion on the value of that or not. Now, because of the acuity of what we're dealing with, I think that money should be repurposed. I think it should be taken from competitive grants and put right into professional development. And I'm hoping that there will be a unity of interest on that. I certainly don't pretend to speak for the governor, but people have an expectation, and justifiably so, that he will be intimately involved in all of these types of issues.
You had said that you wanted to enact greater accountability for the poor implementation of the education reform so far. What does greater accountability look like?
Okay, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
How would you hold state and department more accountable for this poor implementation that has gone on so far? What does that look like?
Well, it looks like, I think it's reflected in the correspondence that we send to the department. I think it's reflected in the point that we're making, that we expect them to act. And as I said before, look, nobody likes to have to do it, but I think they need to stand up and say, it hasn't gone as well as we hoped or intended. So an acknowledgement, not one about, don't tell me you're staying the course. I get it. Tell me that you recognize and you acknowledge the shortcomings. The accountability comes from the notion that they are professionals, they're supposed to act that way, and they should be responding. And frankly, it doesn't necessarily have to be from the legislature. The public has done a darn good job of letting their feelings be known on these subjects. So I believe we're acting as representatives, literally and figuratively, for the public in advancing these things. The accountability comes from expectations that they will do their job, and if they don't, then I think the legislature will be looking at other items. We have legislation to call for an independent study. I don't expect that the department is going to jump up and down for joy over something like that, but that's an example of where we can act. We're giving a menu of, I won't even say options, we're giving a menu of opportunities for the department. And we expect that they will react accordingly.
John, have you reached a conclusion on how much of the test, if any, should be, the test questions should be released?
No, that is not contained in this report. There are, I think one of the things that comes up in relation to that, it appears in the past that a lot of this information, all of it was returned to the field. If you look at Regents, anyone who studied for Regents, what did you do? You used to take old Regents exams. And that is going to continue to be part of the debate. I can very easily kick this can down the road, but tests cost money. And the state education department, if we are going to suggest that all those test questions should be released, I think we have a commensurate obligation to help provide appropriate funding so that the tests can be taken care of in that fashion.
Senator, we have the room for half an hour, so I know some guys want to do stand-ups, correct?
Just one last question. I mean, can you just summarize what your message to the public is today about, what you're doing here?
Yes. This is, I think it's a very good start. I don't want to suggest for a moment that everything that needs to be done is here. I discussed some of the challenges in terms of how do you continue to properly implement, get the value of Common Core without messing things up. I think the public needs to know that we are listening. I would like to respectfully think that we get it, and we are acting. And we are also acting, we're also asking other people who bear responsibility to act as well. If we provide them guidance and they do it, great. If we provide them guidance and they don't, then we may have to act on their behalf. My colleagues and I speak to many of them, Democrats, Republicans, Senate, and Assembly, they are frustrated. And by extension, or really as a representative of the public is, I would say at this juncture, beyond frustrated. So that's why we're doing this. That's why we started. I had discussions about this stuff in April and May, when these tests were being administered. We talked internally about, we need to be taking a look at this, you know, and that's why we announced in July. That's why we did the hearings after school started. So back to the point about how do you define now, that's taken some time. But I do believe in what we've amassed in terms of testimony has been extraordinarily helpful.